Welcome to the Planning to Win podcast. My name is Tom Lakatos. I'm a senior vice president at Lincoln Investment. The likelihood of your success financially increases when you are able to articulate your goals, when you share them with other people, and you write them down. In our experience as advisors, we can help you with some of the basic building blocks around financial planning and tackle some of the more common questions to help jumpstart your planning. And we're looking forward to bringing that to you in this series.
Your employer is the owner of that policy, so they can make the changes. You may lose the policy or end up paying more for it.
Once the diagnosis is known, especially if it's like cancer or something that affects mortality, it gets harder to get.
Sometimes it's a quick medical questionnaire. Sometimes it is an appointment with blood tests and other kind of medical tests.
And we always say, well, listen, don't think too long because we don't even know if you can get it. I'm excited to have Zach Toombs with me this week. Zach is an advisor on our employee advisor group. And we've addressed Zach the last several weeks. I met with Michael and Kyle. We talked a little bit about some of the big questions, right? We know that there are always personal nuances to most insurance questions, but we wanted to at least hit on the topics that we get most often as financial advisors. So, week one, Michael and I talked a little bit about, why you need insurance and some of the various reasons that we've heard. Two is then Kyle came in last week and we talked a little bit about what type of insurance should I get and how much coverage should I have. So Zach, what I want to talk with you about today really is kind of bring the conversation home and talk a little bit. Okay, so I know I need it. I know what kind I need. I know how much I need. How do I go about it? What's the process and what are some of the things I should be thinking about as it relates to how to get it? Before we get into that, Zach, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Of course, and thanks for having me on. So I have been with Lincoln for almost 3 years now. I'm in the industry for 6, and when I'm not a financial advisor, I am a husband and a father to my newborn son. So great timing for this conversation because I just went through the process of getting life insurance.
Awesome. Congrats on the newborn.
Thank you.
That's your first?
First.
Oh, the whole world is in front of you. That's really exciting. And kudos to you guys for thinking about life insurance and how it fits in it. One of the things we've talked about the last couple of weeks is this concept that, we all face adversity in our life. We don't know. We can't predict what kind. Can't stop it from happening, but what we can do is stop financial devastation or people having to significantly change their life and their goals financially. So, Zach, think about this then. Why don't we start with this? So, I've listened to Michael, I've listened to Kyle. I know why I need insurance. I know what type of insurance I need, and I know how much insurance I need. Can you talk just a little bit then? Now that I've decided to get it, what's the process to get it? There's I think a reputation that, it's difficult and it's kind of a pain. And what's been your experience with the life insurance?
You can't buy it on Amazon. And to get started, a lot of people I've found get their insurance through their workplace first because it's typically offered when they get the job, put in front of them as a benefit and usually cheaper. So in that sense, when you start a new job that has benefits like that, you're going to go through the open enrollment. For life insurance, there's typically no medical questioning. It's going to cover your salary. Sometimes you can apply for a little bit more or even take a little bit less. But typically it's going to be the easiest, the cheapest, and there's no medical underwriting to get it through your job. Gotcha.
And I love that. You can't buy it on Amazon. So let's assume then, so I have this group insurance. Why would I want to buy insurance beyond that?
Of course. So your group insurance, again, it's cheap. It's usually easier to obtain. But again, it's through your employer. So if you leave your job, if you retire, whatever may happen, you're not going to have that coverage anymore. There's also some other factors such as your employer is the owner of that policy. So they can make the changes. If there's business administration changes or whatever it may be, you may lose the policy or end up paying more for it.
Gotcha. So I decide then I need more or I want to have a policy outside of that. Talk to me a little bit about what happens from a personal policy perspective in underwriting.
Yeah, so when you're getting your personal policy, it's really a number of factors are going to play in. So you're going to go through the medical underwriting. It's going to come down to what is your job, where do you live, how old are you, if you do any hazardous activities, as hobbies and things like that. So much more detailed, and it's going to be more of a personalized process about your life, kind of what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if I'm hearing you right, and it's not just, when you talk about hobbies, it's not just do you ride a motorcycle or do you jump out of airplanes, right, as an example, but it's also as it relates to your your job, right? Like a police officer, right? They have a little more risk day to day to their life than somebody maybe who sits in an office and does accounting all day, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So talk a little bit then, when you think about medical underwriting, right? So there's an application process. People typically would apply, and then they answer these medical questions, and then there's a process. Does it mean a doctor's visit typically, or how's that work?
It can depend. Every carrier can be different. Some of them, and it depends on age, how much you're applying for, what type of policy you're applying for. But it can vary. Sometimes it's a quick medical questionnaire. Sometimes it is an appointment with they take blood tests and other kind of medical tests. So it does depend on the carrier and the type of policy you're looking for.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, especially as you think about, and I'm glad you said that because, as an example, I would think the more insurance you apply for, right, the more closely they're going to underwrite it, right? Typically. At the end of the day, because that's really what underwriting is. It's an evaluation of the risk that you present, right? It's funny. Maybe, Zach, have you ever had this call where a client calls you and says, "Thank goodness, Zach, I'm so glad I got you on the phone. I really need to buy insurance from you," right? We almost never get that call, right? But when we do, it's usually because the person knows they have health issues.
They need the insurance.
And probably should have got it 6 months ago to a year ago before they got the diagnosis, right? Because once the diagnosis is known, the odds, especially if it's like cancer or something that affects mortality, it gets harder to get. So that makes a lot of sense that the depth of the medical underwriting depends really on the kind of insurance, the death benefit involved, etc. Can you talk a little bit? What happens if, I'm not in great health, Zach, and I go through the medical underwriting, and maybe it comes back that, my height and weight aren't proportionate on the easy side, or on the other side, maybe I come back and I've got early stage, diabetes or something like that. I assume these are the kinds of things that you run across. What's the impact of those on an underwriting process typically?
Yeah, so that can make the policy more expensive. And, what we like to say there is it's not the end of the world. You did qualify for a policy. We can always reevaluate in the future. But one of the things that, could come up is the scenario worsens and you no longer can qualify in the future. So in that case, what we want to do is, that is the time to get the policy and just get it in place, lock in the premiums, and we can always reevaluate to try and lower it later. But it may not have the option to obtain it later if you wait.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. One of the things that we often talk about, as you know, is, we talk about the idea that, deciding that you want life insurance is only part of the question, right? So sometimes we'll meet with clients and we'll say like, "Hey, you really need life insurance," and they'll go, "Well, let me think about it." And we always say, "Well, listen, don't think too long," right? Because we don't even know if you can get it.
Exactly.
Right? So sometimes the strategy is to really, why don't we find out if you can get it while you think about if you want it? And then by the time we figure out if you can get it, you'll decide if you want it, and we'll be making a fact-based decision based on what you qualify for. What you described there, and I love how you said it, right, is that because it's very optimistic. Like if, so there may be a health issue today, and then what they do is they call it a table rating, right, where we applied for your policy standard health, and then they find out there's something going on, and there's table ratings, rating A to table rating Z. And with every table rating, the cost of the insurance is more expensive because the risk is even higher. Some people, when they get a table rating, freak out. And sometimes rightfully, like, a table rating, F might have hundreds of dollars of impact on the premium. How do you think about table ratings, Zach? Because we've come across it where, some people, the natural inclination is to go, "Oh my gosh, I can't afford that." But I think we think a little differently. Talk a little bit about how we think about table rating.
Yeah, and that it is an unfortunate situation. And again, that's one of the times that we're going to have to sit down and look to see how can we afford this policy at this point. Because it's almost as our last stop to get the policy, or a warning sign to say, if we continue to wait, we may not be able to get this policy in the future.
Yeah, that's really important, right? Because at some point they could decline you outright.
Exactly.
And once that happens, the MIB, the Medical Information Bureau, they share information back and forth, right? Once you are known as somebody that's got some issues that stop your ability to get life insurance, you're kind of stuck for now with what you have, and you either have enough at that point or you don't. And if you don't, you got to think about self-insuring in other ways potentially. And to your point earlier, sometimes things can get better. Like, for example, I think about that example I gave you, somebody whose height and weight are disproportionate, right? So they might apply and they might come back obese and they might get a table rating D, and then they get that's a wake-up call. So they go out and they hire a nutritionist, they start to exercise, and 2 years later they are 50 pounds lighter and in much better health, and then you reapply and that table rating gets dropped. But if it gets worse, where the obesity gets worse, you run the risk at some point that the medical company, the insurance company doesn't underwrite you at all, and then you got whatever you got at that time when it happens, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, Zach, this has been really good, right? So this is again, this is a process, and I want to make sure our viewers and our listeners understand you're not entitled to life insurance, right? But if you think about what Zach talked about today, right, this idea around starting with group coverage, supplementing that with personal policies, whether that's term or permanent based on our conversations, you can get to a point where you can have the outcome that you want as it relates to your life insurance, whether that's paying off current needs like a mortgage or a kid's education, or creating long-term multi-generational wealth. Zach, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you taking time to come onto this podcast. I'll look forward to bringing you on in the future on other topics, but this was really helpful. Thanks for your time.
Tom.